right. We'll get going in just a second here. Hi, everyone. We're going to let a couple more people trickle in here, and then we'll get going in just a second. All right. Hello and welcome to Glossy's weekly beauty debrief here on LinkedIn. My name is Lexi Lebsack. I'm our West Coast correspondent here at Glossy, and I am joined today by Tatiana Pyle, our managing editor, Courtney Marabella, our social media and audience manager, Emily Jensen, our senior reporter, and I just saw our editor-in-chief, Jill Manoff, jump in too. So welcome, everybody. So today we are going to be discussing all things SPF sunscreen, from the buzziest launches and campaigns all the way to the alleged misinformation happening on social media around sunscreen safety. Going to dig into that. We'll also talk about the latest consumer behavior trend in sunscreen shopping and how sunscreen counterfeiting is impacting shoppers. So I'd like to sort of start with some of these can't miss launches and campaigns. And Tatiana, I know you have been following some of these. What can you share with us about these buzzy new launches? What is happening in sun care?
There is so much happening in sun care, actually. As I was doing some digging ahead of our conversation today, I have covered a few myself, but also on Glossy's Instagram, we did kind of a roundup talking about some of the buzzier campaigns. So I'll share an overview of some of the ones I thought were the most interesting. So in March, So de Janeiro, which we previously have spoken about in regards to their kind of rise to fame with their Sunbum cream, they tapped into sunscreen and tapped Richie Green, who is really popular on TikTok, as their ambassador for its new Rio Radiance SPF sunscreen collection. And they actually had a huge accompanying campaign called Sunscreen Worthy of Your Skin. I'm sure many of us have seen it on social media. I actually randomly had a friend who had the SPF. It was in an aerosol spray, a can spray, and it smells so lovely, and it provides so much moisture and hydration. So I think, it kind of goes back to why So de Janeiro is a really buzzy brand. They have great quality products at a mid-price range, and the products are really, really nice. And then also in March, Ulta MD, which is a derm-backed skincare brand, they expanded its ultra popular UV Clear and UV Daily collections to include deeper tint iterations of those products. And then in April, there's so many things. In April, Image Skincare also launched an anti-aging sun care collection, which I thought was really interesting. That same month, Vacation expanded its sun care to actually go, and they expanded into a new category, which is the face, which I thought was really, really cool. And then if you haven't seen it, Paris Hilton has done a ton of collabs in the last year and a half or so. But she worked with Tan Lux, which is a really popular tanning brand, and she helped them launch their first ever campaign. And they put out a they put out a new Airbrush 360 self-tan mist, which was really cool. And then lastly, I just wanted to pull some information. We wrote, our senior pot reporter, Sarah, wrote an article in May talking about the buzziest skincare brand or sun care brands. And the number one spot was Supergoop, which I think comes at no surprise. But number two in that list was Neutrogena's Ultra Sheer Dry Touch Sunscreen Lotion. And then Black Girl Sunscreen was number three, and Kapari's Sunshield Body Glow was number 4 on the list.
Wow, that is a lot of sun care that has come out in such a short period of time.
Yeah, it's the year of sun care. We've been talking about it, internally amongst ourselves on our team, but there are a ton of brands that are coming out with sunscreen, both chemical and mineral.
I didn't. Did you notice if like there's one category that's growing the most, like whether that's chemical or mineral or body or face, or is it sort of like a big mix?
I think it's a big mix. What I think, however, the dark horse here is self tanner. There are brands that are tapping into self-tan, which I think is really interesting. Again, we've kind of talked about this internally, but I think people are tanning again and tanning very openly. I've been seeing so many people talk about their tanning process on TikTok. So I'm really interested to see which brands are kind of going to expand into that category in the coming months or so.
And Tatiana, what did you notice about sort of like the launch strategies or campaigns that were very effective or maybe like cut through the noise versus the ones that, like weren't as effective? Because I know some of these sun products I heard of, and then other ones I was like, oh, I didn't even catch that one. I didn't even hear about that campaign.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think, some of the brands that are known for their sunscreen, like Vacation, for instance, or Ulta MD, it didn't seemingly have like a more splashy campaign. I think that people probably just discovered the products just based off the brand's name and reputation. Whereas a brand like Sol de Janeiro, which is historically known for its body mist, kind of went bigger with their campaign and brighter. Tapping Sophia Richie Grange was obviously a really smart and strategic move because she's all over. So, some way or another, somebody was going to find out about their new category expansion. So I definitely think the brands that were more known for sunscreen didn't really invest as much into the campaigns, whereas brands that are now tapping into this new category definitely went bigger, brighter, splashier.
That makes sense. And then are there any that you saw, or like during this process of looking into this, that you saw that you're like, oh, I want to try that one?
Yeah, I do want to try, I forgot to mention earlier, but Naturium also launched a skin tint for deeper shades. So I definitely want to try that. I think that's more in my price point when I'm shopping as a consumer. And I love the Naturium brand. I think a lot of the products that they come out with are really good for the body. So I'm interested to see, now that they're kind of expanding into this new sun care market, how good and how high quality their products are.
Ooh, that's such a great call out. We know Naturium is owned by e.l.f., and that's a big push that e.l.f. is having right now to get further into the skincare space. And Tatiana, you're so right, because there are some products that I love so much, but like the face sunscreen is almost $100. And so some years I buy it and some years I don't. Because I'm just like, yeah, so pricey. Okay, thank you for that. That was all very interesting. Emily, let's take it over to you. I want to talk a little bit about what we're sort of calling like a changing consumer behavior trend. So shopping for sunscreen filters online that we don't have in the US yet, and that sort of growing trend, and then how counterfeiting is, I guess, impacting this. But Emily, I know you looked into this, so you tell us, what did you find?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting about sunscreen just as a product is that the U.S. classifies it as a drug, whereas in most of the world, sunscreen is classified as a cosmetic. And because the FDA here in the U.S. classifies it as a drug, that means it has to undergo a lot more stringent testing than what you would see with other cosmetic products. And because of that, there's a lot of sunscreen ingredients that are available in, say, Europe or Asia, but not here in the U.S. And this sort of consensus in a lot of the beauty world is that those ingredients are not just better in terms of like their efficacy, but they're also more comfortable to wear. And obviously, if sunscreen is more comfortable to wear, we're more prone to reapply it, as we should, for better protection. And so because of that, consumers now are interested in purchasing sunscreens, from, let's say, Korean brands, which are often regarded as having a very high quality products, not just with skincare as a whole, but sunscreen specifically. But the issue with that is there's this rise of counterfeit sunscreens. And some brands that, consumers have said on like TikTok or Reddit that they've accidentally purchased counterfeit sunscreens from are like Beauty of Joseon, which is a very popular Korean brand, or Round Lab, another popular Korean brand. And to the point that those brands have actually tried to do some, work to educate consumers on how to buy authentic products, encouraging consumers to only buy from authorized resellers or to stay away from like Amazon, for example, where there's less controls, there's more third-party sellers where consumers might accidentally purchase counterfeit sunscreens.
Wow. And did you see anything about sort of anyone who had purchased, did you see any like anecdotes or anything about people who had purchased sunscreen, like fake sunscreen, and like what their experience was like, or are people not really talking about that?
No, people are talking about it. I think what's tricky is that it's like, well, how do you prove that it's like fake or real? Like, we're not cosmetic chemists in our home, but some, influencers have spoken out on TikTok and they've noticed that like the texture is different, let's say. Brands have also tried to raise more awareness to like look for, if you see differences in like this font, this is what ours looks like. Some of the fakes look like this. And even I saw Beauty of Joseon tried to institute like a QR code to help consumers verify, like if they were purchasing it to arrive in the US to verify that it's real. That didn't seem to work. It seems they've taken it down. So I think this is still an ongoing issue that brands are trying to experiment with. But that said, in the US, like I think there is more consumer awareness of some of these better ingredients that are available overseas and potentially pressure to get some of these available. Currently, there's one ingredient that's under FDA review that's used in like the Beauty of Joseon sunscreen that's called bimotrizonol. And my apologies if my pronunciation of that is not correct. That could arrive in the US for 2025. But again, it's still under review. That might take more time to get to consumers. And one issue right now for brands is that because the FDA treats sunscreens here like a drug, that means they have to go undergo animal testing to be sold in the US. And obviously that's a very controversial topic for cosmetic brands. But there's currently a bipartisan bill in US Congress, currently is under review, that would require the FDA to allow non-animal testing for these types of ingredients. So that might open up the door for more brands to be sold here as well.
Wow, how interesting. And where are people shopping for most of these, like overseas sunscreens? Is it like on like TikTok Shop? Is it like, I'm assuming there are I'm assuming there are like e-tailers that are like trusted, or how do people find them? How do they buy them?
Yeah, there is Amazon and TikTok Shop, which unfortunately what these brands have said is that those are not super reputable. Those might be like third-party sellers that are selling counterfeits. Soko Glam, you can purchase some of these brands through there. But it's tricky. Like I think some consumers as well, as we see with like, it's very popular TikTok content, like consumers going to like the French pharmacies in Paris and purchasing them overseas and just bringing them back. And there's other like smaller third-party resellers as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Courtney, Tatiana, Jill, or anyone listening in the audience, please put your hand up if you have a comment. But has anyone tried any of these? Like I know Beauty of Joseon, that one's like very popular online, but I've never tried it. Has anyone tried it? Or Emily, have you tried any of these?
I have not personally tried it, in part because I was sort of aware of this like counterfeit risk, and I haven't done the personal research for myself as a consumer to like go out and buy it from an authorized retailer. But I would definitely love to try it and compare it to the sunscreens that I have that I purchased here in the US and see if it actually is much better in terms of like texture or wear, just how it feels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's really exciting that we could potentially be getting some new filters in the coming years, especially this one that I'm not going to pronounce, but that you did perfectly, I'm sure. But yeah, that's exciting. Cool. Well, I want to talk a little bit about, we're about halfway through this so far, so we're ending in 15 minutes, but I want to talk a little bit about the sort of misinformation happening on social media about sunscreen, and super curious if anyone listening has any sort of insight into this. But I guess my first question would be for Courtney, Jill, Tatiana, Emily, have you guys seen any of this like sunscreen content online talking about the negative effects or, warning against sunscreen? Curious if it's made it to your algorithms.
It definitely has to mine. And I see some influencers talking about like homemade sunscreen, which I'm really fascinated by, like blending up the ingredients themselves. And I do see also some influencers talking about not using sunscreen at all and saying that actually we need vitamin D, which of course we do, but saying that, you know, we shouldn't wear sunscreen and we should spend time out in the sun just soaking it up. So I'm super curious about that. Those make me very nervous, seeing them out on TikTok and potentially spreading what could be very harmful misinformation about sunscreen.
Yeah, that's sort of the same stuff that I'm seeing as well. So that's like a really great little intro into this. It's exactly what Emily's saying. There are a lot of posts claiming that sunscreen is not necessary, that it could potentially cause harmful reactions in the body like cancer, that you're getting plenty of vitamin D from natural sunlight and you don't need sunscreen. The hashtag no sunscreen is about to hit 100 million views on TikTok, and that is through about 36 million posts right now. It's really hard to track this kind of content, though. Some of the bigger influencers who are talking about these topics online are hashtagging it with, affiliated tags, but not all of them are. If you just look at the hashtag sunscreen, that has about 1.4 million posts. And currently on TikTok, the hashtag anti-sunscreen has amassed 5.3 million views. So some of the themes that we're hearing is like, just stop wearing sunscreen. We're hearing that wearing sunglasses actually makes you burn because then your body doesn't know you're in the sun. That sunscreen causes cancer. That's a big one. That the sun does not cause skin cancer, and that it's actually the sunscreen that's causing cancer. That's another big one. One argument is that since sunscreen came out, the rise of skin cancer has only gone up, which actually is true, but the sort of debunking of this one is that actually just diagnoses are going up right now, and the reality is that skin cancer that is treated today is often from exposure that happened, potentially decades ago. And so these are some of the like sort of big messages that are going around right now. Sunscreen blocks vitamin D production, and that the only way to really protect your skin is to build melanin and protect skin, quote unquote, the natural way. But yeah, some surveys that have come out to kind of get this little bit of context are a bit scary. There was a survey conducted by the Orlando Health Cancer Institute, and it found that 1 in 7 adults under 35 think that sunscreen is actually more harmful to the skin than direct sun exposure. Another one from the American Academy of Dermatology found that many members of Gen Z are just simply unaware of the risk. And some stats behind that is that 37% of Gen Z respondents say they only wear sunscreen when they're like nagged by other people, and 30% believe that tanning is completely safe for the skin as long as you don't burn, which we know isn't true. Dermatologists tell us constantly that it's incidental sun exposure that can have one of the bigger effects, negative effects on skin. And then one last stat here before I get into sort of my thoughts on this, which is that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found that only 8% of men and 26% of women under 30 said that they always wear sunscreen when they're outside for at least an hour on a sunny day. So the thing about this, okay, so here are some thoughts I have, and I'm curious also to sort of hear what you guys think. But it's like younger generations were already less likely to use sunscreen. You see that, that stat a lot, but now there's sort of more of a movement thanks to social media. And like Emily said, with like the making your own sunscreen trend, there is some crossover that I saw with like the homesteading movement, the trad wife movement, this sort of like rejection of a lot of our societal norms. I feel like there's a lot of crossover with that. But one more stat before we keep going. I don't want to bury everyone in stats, but the publication Glam reported that they did a deep dive into various different search functions, and they found that does sunscreen cause cancer as a search term, and what causes cancer in sunscreen. those two search terms have risen by 160% and 170% from the end of April to the end of May this year, which is a little scary. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what you guys all think of this. But I feel like for me, it just seems like consumers and lay people have really just kind of been primed for this, because a lot of the misinformation that's going around is actually rooted in these like grains of truth. So it's like, if you think about all of the things that we've been exposed to in the media over the last 5 years, in 2019, a big JAMA study that I'm sure everyone remembers came out that said that chemical filters end up in the blood. Okay, so point blank, like that's exactly what happens. But we don't necessarily know how dangerous that is. Also in 2021 was basically when the marine life and coral legislation went into effect in Hawaii and in parts of Florida and other countries outside the U.S., banning oxybenzone, avobenzone, octinoxate, and octocrylane. And then we saw, I know you guys all remember, the big study that came out that found benzene in 78 different sunscreen and sunscreen aftercare products. And that was that study done by the company ValueSure in 2021. And in case anyone isn't familiar, benzene is a known carcinogen, and it's a chemical that basically they're not putting in the sunscreen, but is a byproduct of the manufacturing process. So benzene will just kind of like pop up in some of these products. And then last one, I don't know if I actually missed this one. I didn't see this study come out, but I do think it went pretty wide, which is that octocrylane, which is, I would say, one of the more controversial filters in chemical sunscreens, it can actually very easily degrade into benzophenone, which is a chemical that's also like a known carcinogen. So we know that it causes cancer in human beings. And then, of course, there's so much going on right now with titanium dioxide, banned in California in several forms. And so there kind of are some big worrisome issues with conventional sunscreen. But I think that what these posts are saying is kind of taking it at, making it into this large issue that maybe isn't quite as big because we don't totally know the dangers of sun care. And derms, this has been going on for years and I've covered this, but derms basically, they won't condemn sunscreen in any kind of a public way, very few. And that's because what we understand about sunscreen safety is still developing, but what we know about cancer is fatal. And melanoma is the deadliest form of cancer we know, and that's skin cancer. So I just really word vomited a lot at you guys, but curious as to, what you think about all of this. It's certainly very fascinating.
It's fascinating. I'll chime in just as an outsider. I haven't really come into this prepared, but I would just say, I think a lot of what's happening on social media and maybe a lot of the backlash is maybe from some of these sun worshippers, and they're picking up on kind of theories that work to their advantage and leaning into that. You see this in various ways. Speaking of some of the crossover, wondered what the theory is. It's related to all of this, but forever there was the notion that makeup foundation with SPF doesn't suffice. Like, you need a separate sunscreen. Is that still intact, that theory? And again, to not word vomit myself, but I've been seeing a lot of, first of all, Gen Zers. They're all about the tinted sunscreen now. My niece is asking for, like, do you have any that I can have, that I can borrow? It's a trend. And also seeing a lot of products come out, new products that are both meant to give you the look of a tan and have SPF. It's like the best of both worlds. So the glow drops and also these kind of bronzing body care products, the bronzing and also SPF. Some brands just have recently pitched me and said, we're the only ones with SPF, bronzing drops with SPF. And I'm like, no, you're not. But anyway, this is happening. So anyway, just wondering the landscape, what the notion is. Do these products work? Do they suffice? Do you need a pure SPF? And this is all that's going to work, is the theory. Or what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, Jill, I totally agree with that. I think that it's definitely people who are sun worshippers and definitely people who are taking sort of information out of context. So it's like when you hear when you hear about a peer-reviewed journal like JAMA coming out and saying, well, we tested all these people, and as soon as you put sunscreen on, the chemical sunscreen on, you're basically finding it in the blood. Like, that's kind of scary. It's scary for a layperson. Dermatologists and doctors came out later and were like, whoa, don't panic. Everything goes into your blood. Your body can filter it out. It's chill. Don't worry. But that is scary for a layperson. So, and the reality is that a lot of sunscreens are kind of gross, right? I wear sunscreen. I recommend everyone wear sunscreen, but it's sunscreen, there's a compliance issue there. A lot of sunscreens, especially ones that are older or, aren't, not as advanced formulations, compliance isn't great because they're kind of uncomfortable to wear. So when you do hear some of these stats or some of these studies that are a little scary, all that taken out of context, and you already don't want to wear sunscreen, I mean, come on. It's it's the perfect excuse. It's like you ask the person who you know is going to give you the answer you want. So I do think that that's a big part of it. You're totally right, Jill. And then in terms of sunscreens being in makeup, dermatologists tend to say that there is not enough sunscreen in makeup to actually protect you, that it's more of like a bonus, but for you to get proper amount of sunscreen, you have to put half the bottle of foundation on, and people aren't really doing that. So it's best to think about that as just like a little bonus, like a little extra. And then in terms of tinted products, I would say that is a huge trend and one that has been going pretty strong within mineral sunscreens for a long time. I prefer a tinted sunscreen, and that's because I prefer a mineral sunscreen. So even though they do, tend to, not have too much of a white cast if they are a more modern formula, the tint definitely helps to disguise that. And also it gives you a little bit of tone, evenness in your skin. So that's really, really popular. But curious if I missed anything. Curious if anyone else has any thoughts on this.
One thing I will say is I'm just really curious. I feel like the sort of said unsaid thing with sunscreen I've noticed for quite a few years is that it's pushed as a health thing. Of course, we want to protect ourselves from cancer, which we should all be doing, and I think dermatologists should be educating us about. But the kind of unsaid thing seems to be that we're also interested in sunscreen as an anti-aging measure ultimately, and I'm sort of curious then how long this sunscreen backlash will last in terms of don't wear sunscreen, if we start to then think about, well, whether you worry about the health effects this might cause you to develop more wrinkles or sunspots, which is ultimately, I think a lot of consumers are worried about, even if we don't say that directly.
I totally agree. I think for a lot of people, the only reason they're wearing sunscreen is because they don't want, discoloration. They don't want, the aging sort of part of this, which is the fine lines, the wrinkles, the spots, all of that stuff. So yeah, I think that maybe is potentially one of the best ways to get people to wear sunscreen. But I mean, it feels like a lot of the people who are talking about this online are sort of very young. So maybe in their young 20s or maybe even younger. And I don't know, maybe this is just a theory, but it's maybe these people aren't necessarily thinking about that yet because they're not having any of those signs of aging yet. So it's if you don't have signs of aging yet, maybe you just think oh, it'll never happen to me, or it's out of sight, out of mind. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Emily, that's a good call.
I was thinking the same exact thing. Cancer's a huge thing, but it's vanity and aging and what's happening there, for sure. It would be interesting to know if, what are they called? A spray tan company is seeing less business as more people are tanning, and what's happening in that world. Any backlash around fragrance and sunscreen? I see a return to the Hawaiian tropic and coconut I don't know, like that very tropical fragrance and more fragrances, which is really no surprise considering like Sol de Janeiro and the rise of all of these amazing fragrances, but not a thing, or is it just like a trend and I don't know that I'm seeing?
Ooh, that's a good call. I haven't heard anything about the fragrances. I actually haven't really heard much about like formulations on social media. Like people aren't really talking about formulas or fragrances, but has anyone else seen that?
No.
I haven't either.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we'll see kind of what happens with this. If anyone listening has any thoughts that they'd love to share, you can hit the little react button and I can call you up onto our like digital stage. Curious to hear what everyone thinks. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think that it's a little bit scary as to what happens next, but at the same time, in my mind, as I'm going through this and like prepping for this call, I was like, well, it's all the youngins. Like, I mean, like, I feel like this will all just kind of fade away, but maybe it won't. Maybe this will be this, this big backlash, but I guess only time will tell. All right. Well, thank you all. We're hitting time right now. Thank you all for joining today on our beauty debrief. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Check out glossy.co. We have tons of content around sun care and the latest happening in the beauty industry. And we will be here next Wednesday with another conversation. So we hope to see you there.